Okay, we have a special episode today for two reasons. The first one is Emily Athena is here, somatic sex educator, sexual wellness coach, founder of Eros Spark. Am I saying that right? I said it wrong twice, I think, before. So she does interesting stuff, and I want to ask her about it. And Patricia Aguirre, all the way from Mexico, via the Good Looking Men of France, is here. Many of you may know Patricia from our trauma courses, working with women, boundaries, Courage to Lead course, long-time collaborator, co-leader of the company, old friend, and in person for the first time in 3 years because we're teaching in Slovenia. Did I miss anything in your
probably, but good enough.
It's good enough for now.
I don't want to.
It's good enough for now. And it's sort of more her topic. So I thought, you know, as you just arrived, let's get her on as well. And we're going to talk about some interesting things. So Emily, let's start with your life story. What got you interested in the sexy stuff? What was your route into your work?
Interesting. I think like most people, I had, you know, next to no sex education and just all the normal stuff, you know, get into relationships. It's great at first. You lose your interest in sex and, you know, just wonder why and just all the normal stuff. But my life before that was all dance. So I grew up dancing in ballet, then became a contemporary dancer, professional dancer, got into fitness, personal training, Pilates, all of that. And then I got injured. And then, you know, this thing I loved and was so privileged to do became such a pain. A literal pain, like literally pain for 10 years dancing on an injury. And so I reached a breaking point where I knew, you know, I can't keep doing this anymore. And that's when I sort of got into sex education in a very roundabout way through fitness, through core and pelvic floor rehabilitation, led me into sex education, which led me into trauma resolution, which led me to finding a way to stay in the realm of movement because I knew that was my connection to my aliveness, even though it had become so dulled and painful over the 10 years. And by combining those things, sex education, trauma resolution, and somatic movement, I found a way to find pleasure in my body again and expression, and to have movement be healing and pleasurable and my compass of truth, instead of it being what it had been, which was, you know, a tool for profit and production. Mm-hmm. And so that's really how I got from there to here.
Sex, trauma, and somatics. This sounds like three of the best things ever. Lots to talk about. Who do you generally help at the moment? Give us an idea of sort of like a day in your life. Like how does it work? You're like coaching people, you're dancing with women. Like, how does it work?
Yeah, so I both have my private coaching practice where I work with folks one-on-one, and I work with women, but I also work with men, and I also work with couples and non-binary folks. So that's, you know, there's some differences there, but we're more the same than we are different. I'll say that from working with people of different genders and backgrounds and coming to me for different things. And then Eros Spark is, at this point, it's just for women. And these are classes that I teach where people come and it's not about what it looks like at all. So there's this real, you know, diversion from the world of dance and being oriented toward an audience or a mirror or an other, and having it be about the aesthetic. And it's really all about what it feels like, finding threads of pleasure in the body. And we do that because, you know, people come to me usually with low desire. They want to have sex again, right? There's a wanting for the wanting, but you don't start with the wanting. You start with arousal. Arousal comes before desire, finding your turn on. Once you feel turned on, then sex sounds like a good idea, but you also can't force yourself to get turned on. So that's why we start with these simple embodied pleasures and finding pleasure in the body through guided, but also intuitive and free form movement.
turn on sounds like a thing you just turn on and off, doesn't it? So
right, the switch, yeah, the turn on, the turn off. So simple, you just shoot, shoot, but it's a little bit more complex than that.
Anything jump out at you, Patricia?
Sure. What would you say that's the things that happen, or what's the thing that happens that women or people in general lose that spark or that one thing, as you said, and it sort of like disappears along the way? What do you find in common?
Well, often stress. But I think, you know, if you Google, like, why do I have low libido? You'll get answers like medication, hormone fluctuations, mental health issues, relationship issues. And these are all true. These are all going to affect your libido, your desire for sex, all true. But what I found in working with people is that there's usually a deeper root that's below all of those things. And for most women, which is most of the people who come to me for low libido, it's not owning your sexuality. It's being socialized to believe that your sexuality is for someone else. Your beauty, your aesthetic, everything is for someone else. And when you go through life with that belief, and usually it's a subconscious belief, people don't, you know, believe that in their conscious mind, but that's how we've been socialized and raised. You can't freely give, right? Sex is generous and generative. It's this beautiful thing, but you can't freely give what you feel is being taken from you. And after so long, your body will say, no, absolutely not. We are not going to be taken from anymore. Even if, like, you know, you have this loving partner who's not trying to like consciously take from you. It's just this like underlying insidious dynamic that's been set up where the body eventually says no. And until you do the work to really own your sexuality and have it be yours again, only then can you freely like give and be generous and decide who to share that with.
How does a woman or person who has owned their sexuality look like?
That's a really good question. I've thought about this a lot as a person who has done this work and like is sexually empowered. You know, I'm making the air quotes for people who are listening. There's no place of like arrival or perfection. Like I'm still going to override my body sometimes. I'm still going to not say the thing I want to say during sex. I'm still going to have all these little micro moments, but there's like a general sense of centeredness or ownership of my yes and my no that wasn't there before. And a connection to my pleasure and orienting toward my pleasure, both in and out of sexual experiences that wasn't there before.
You can feel it in others too, right? I mean, that's palatable. If I'm next to you, you missed the sort of cheeky look between us there, but as you said, you know, what is it like? And I kind of looked to Patricia because I would regard her as in that category. And like the difference between someone like you or someone who's just closed down, London, lawyer, you know, not in a body, tight or traumatized, Berlin, feminist, you know, they're sort of those bodies feel palpably different than someone who's gone through a process to reown that sexuality, whether it's from trauma or not, right? Like that is noticeable. It's not just for guys, I think, right? You can feel that in other women.
In other women?
Yeah. Like how they move, how they feel. Like, to me, it's obvious, no?
Is it obvious, Emily?
Well, what I hear when I hear you speak, Mark, is like that level of protection that so many people have up because they don't own their sexuality and have a clear ability to use their yes and their no and be fluent in that way. There's the wall of protection that has come down to protect that person that feels so hard and rigid and inward and all of those things. And that comes up so much in my coaching work with women is like, there is this wall that comes up. And so the work is like learning for the discernment to come from within, and to have so much ownership and trust in self that like wall isn't necessary anymore. And it's a process, but it's totally possible.
And I guess there's something about just the world we're in, right? Like, I'm talking to my wife about this, and she deals and plays poker. And I'm like, okay, you spend all your time sitting still, deliberately not expressing yourself or moving your body, and competing around a table with 10 men. Like, that's her world, right? And that to me is a very exaggerated version of just the average office worker. And it's like, in that environment of the modern context of sort of industrial, non-cyclical, competitive, disembodied world, like, it's pretty hard for anyone to get in touch, I would imagine, any kind of feminine flow anyway. Like it's that must be a challenge for you ladies, no?
Yes, and it's been so unsafe for so many women as well. So that protection that like we learn to have is very necessary. And sort of that like tight disembodiment, that's a gift of survival. And so we don't want to like demonize any of those things, but to find the full aliveness and the full expression and the full like palette of humanness, like eventually, like just like the work you do, helping people resolve trauma and come back into their bodies, it's like that is the work to find more pleasure, more expression. But the ways that our bodies protect us from what is unsafe, like, is also honorable and beautiful. And
I think it's
to come back,
recognizing that as a sort of honoring it, as you say, as a self-defense. And I guess we're going into the trauma territory here. And one thing I've learned over even just the last 10 years is just like how much trauma most women are carrying around sex. And it's not like most blokes get exactly encouraged for it. Do you know what I mean? When a little boy walks in, says, why is my penis like this? He's got his first erection, kind of thing. It's not like most parents would say, oh, well done, Or as a teenage boy, you start liking girls. It's not like the teachers in school are really encouraging it or anything, right? So, but there's a lot of pain and healing around this topic. It's a wonder any of us are sort of feeling safe and open and relaxed enough to connect with anyone.
Yeah.
What helps then in that context? I'll ask you both this, like, as someone who isn't a woman, and I do see that not in every case, because there's plenty of boys who are abused, whatever. Generally, like, there is a difference in the level of unwanted sexual attention, unwanted, from a glance to a full soul or something awful. Like, how do you keep open and feminine and giving in that context, like, without just going, fuck this?
Well, you don't, I think. And, just like any trauma resolution process, like you go through the therapy, you go through the process, but, coming back into the body is part of the healing process, not only to find like your pleasure again, but to find your instinct and your intuition and what was thwarted in those protective processes, the words you couldn't say, the movements you couldn't do. And like coming back into the body is the healing process. And just knowing that, first of all, knowing that the body is, while it feels like the unsafe place to be, it's also the place where the healing happens. And just knowing that takes time, and you can repair and find your pleasure again and move out of this narrow box of what we think sex is. Like, oh, sex is penetration. Sex is for a man's pleasure. Like, whatever ideas we have, when we can widen that narrow, sphere to include what actually feels good for you. And it's so individual, it's such a beautiful way of finding our self-expression. And when we can do that, when there's actually something that you like on the menu, it's much easier to like want to have sex. But if what you think of sex is this thing that like doesn't feel good for you, well, like, of course you're not going to want that, and you're going to stay far away from that.
What would you say, Emily, or what do you usually respond to people who are focused on, let's say, I need the environment to change, or I need my partner to change in order for me to enjoy the type of sexual life that they want to create?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I encounter that a lot. Yeah. The only way for anything to change is for us to change, right? Like wherever we go, there we are. You can move to a new city, you could get a new partner, but nothing's going to really be different until you become different. You know, I'm experiencing this in my relationships with my family. It's like, you know, these dynamics with my parents or whatever that have been set up over years and years and years. And I can't expect them to be the one to change. So I have to approach them differently. I have to make a different choice in order for the dynamic to change. And it's the same way, you know, with your partner and with sexuality. And I've seen it happen. Just a client I had recently, she came to me want to have sex with her husband again, very common. But she had never self-pleasured before. She had never, you know, masturbated or given herself any sexual pleasure. And slowly we walked into that, and she learned how to do that. And of course, her relationship with her husband changed. Her sexual relationship with her husband changed from her finding her own pleasure and owning her own sexuality. So we just can't expect other people to do the work for us.
Low libido is a surprisingly common thing, right? In the modern context, and particularly I just see with long-term relationships, seems to be incredibly common. Like, I won't talk about my own life because it's not fair on my wife, but it's like, you know, I hear friends constantly say things like, oh, I haven't been laid in weeks or months. And, you know, I had one female friend say, I haven't had sex with my husband over a year. And I was like, what? How is this person still your husband? And then other people go, oh, yeah, that happens, you know. And it's almost accepted, particularly in some cultures. Or is it just actually, you know what, we're not really designed to be in an erotic relationship with one person long term? You know, is that, for those who are in monogamous relationships, just sort of how it is? Like there's this kind of idea that we would all like to be having the kind of sex life like we had in our first month or 2 months of meeting when we're, you know, 78 and da 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 da. Like, what's your take on this without being idealistic or without writing anyone off?
Yeah, there's a real philosophical debate there. Like, are we meant to be monogamous or not? And I don't know. It's a choice we make, and we get a lot of benefits from making that choice. And there's also, any choice you make, there's going to be some drawbacks. So I think what happens is, just like we're always growing and evolving as people, right? We're always changing. Our sexual selves and our eroticism are always growing and shifting and changing. And trying to keep that the same as it was when you first got into a relationship with someone and expecting that to be the same years and years and years down the line, it makes no sense. It's like, you're different, you have changed. And so the more that we can each have a real relationship with our sexuality and our eroticism, and really understand that and be true to that and let it shift and evolve and grow and change and do that together, I do believe, and I see it in people, that they can keep their sexual connection strong and vibrant. And it's going to ebb and flow and dip and rise. And, you know, it's not going to be the same. But if you want to stay connected to that person and they're also committed to staying connected to their erotic self, like, you know, you can find that growth together.
Yeah, I don't think Dara would mind me saying this. One of the questions I really like is like, what do I like in this person now? Right? Because it's so easy to take someone for granted when you've lived with them for a while. And sometimes I look at her and go, okay, I know like cognitively what I think is hot with my wife. But then it's like when I look at her, it might actually be oh, I'm not going to give examples. It's not fair on her. She's a private person, but it's like this specific little weird things or something. Like, oh, I never used to find that hot, but actually that's really hot. And that is, that's a shifting thing. Like, what do I like about this person now in reality, right here, right now, as a sort of erotic mindfulness practice? I think it's quite helpful question, I find.
Yeah, because you're paying attention. You know, embodiment is so much about paying attention, right?
Okay.
You know, it's so much about paying attention to what we're noticing in ourselves. And so this relational attunement is what I would call that, is about really paying attention to your partner. And I think, you know, people always want to know, like, well, how do I become a great lover? And there's no tip, there's no trick, there's no technique, because every body is different. The only thing it takes is the skill of attunement. And that's
the job, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not necessarily an easy skill, but that's how you become a great lover. You attune to your own body, and you attune to the body or bodies that you're with.
Mm-hmm. And yeah.
I'm gonna also play a bit with the question.
Yeah.
What usually happens when women, because a lot of women, and I guess a lot of people in general, are very attracted to this idea of, oh, the way to that connection that they crave, and that sexual connection that they crave, is through doing my work, being attentive to what I'm connecting to what my body, to what's happening in my body, and therefore being able to connect with other. But what if the other person's not responsive? Is it you're gonna do all the magic happen just by changing yourself, or changing yourself enough so that you change the other person?
On a tantra course or a tango class, or like, I mean, it's got to be mutual, surely, though, right? Like, there's got to be some dance in that.
Well, that's the thing. Like, do you have buy-in from your partner to, you know, to want to do something different sexually? Like, that is a conversation to have, 100%. And I find that most partners, you know, so if I work with mostly women, then, you know, in heterosexual relationships, the partners are mostly men. I find that most men, like, they're just down for whatever. They're like, whatever, I'm cool. Like, whatever's going to bring you pleasure, whatever's going to, like, however I can, like, win and know what to do and feel good about myself, in that, like, you're having pleasure and you're having a good time, like, I'm down.
We're service dogs, essentially.
We're gonna see a huge migration movement after this podcast is public into where are you, Oregon, right?
Oregon? No, there's no men. She's not. She's this. No, it's Ashland. That's okay. It's not Portland. Shout out to all the non-men in Portland. We like to insult Portland regularly on this podcast. It used to be California, but we've changed our ways. Okay, so yeah, but there's something in that. Like, I get that as a guy. It's like, okay, what do I need to do? You know, it's like, sign me up. Okay, how do I help? You know, what do you need? What do you need? Like, that is the kind of question that I think, like, half decent guys asking, surely.
And I'll also say that, you know, getting out of the narrow definition of sex that we have and expanding to, you know, other possibilities, other pleasure possibilities, it doesn't just benefit women. It benefits men too. Like, even though the way things are set up now, it's more oriented toward the male arousal trajectory and male pleasure, it's also not working great for men. Like, there's so much more potential there for pleasure, for connection, for transcendent experiences. So it really benefits everyone to redefine sex, to try new things, to slow down, to feel more. It's not just for the benefit of, like, female sexuality.
No. And let's talk about the cultural piece. It's a bit of an obsession on the show. So much embodiment stuff comes from the States. Obviously, in our company, the main trainers are German, Dutch, Mexican, and Anglo-Irish, right? They're the four main trainers in the company. So we can't really avoid it, right? Like, culture will come up on the course we're about to do in Slovenia, no doubt, because some things will happen and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's an East European thing. And you'll be like, what the fuck, right? Or you'll be like, this is easy. And they'll be like, no, it's not. like in terms of pleasure and the body, like what's something that comes up for you that might be kind of cultural piece here, or you've seen because you've been traveling in France and Mexico, the States. Just recently, I've been traveling. I'm sure your clients, Emily, are from all over the place as well. Like, what's the cultural piece here? Because I feel it's quite strong, like in terms of how people relate to pleasure in the body.
Well, here in the US, I feel like we have two extremes. We have the puritanical. This could also be, the religious, which is not just in the US, is in many different places. And then we have the pornographic.
Okay.
And so, the extreme, like repression, and like almost the extreme, like demonstrative, like the Olympics of, like almost like making sex like a caricature, like,
yeah.
And then so neither ends of that spectrum are usually what people are interested in. It's like, ooh no, but there's like no modeling for what else, like what's in the middle.
Neither's embodied either, right? Like, and one's performative and the other one's repressive.
Exactly.
The other thing that occurred to me about the States and sort of modern, on the sort of liberal side of things rather than conservative, is everything the conservatives just connected with sex seems to be about reproduction. It's a man and a woman and they have children and it's a family. And then on the liberal side, it's completely non-reproductive. So it's like, you're shagging a plastic dolphin, or it's two guys, or it's abortion, and all of these are nuanced issues, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not taking a side there. One thing that occurred to me, though, is the difference in emphasis on sort of reproductivity. On one side being just sex about reproduction. On the other side, almost anti having children, which is kind of like, I have these conversations on this podcast with various people around sex and sexuality quite often. Probably had about 30 or 40 of them. And almost no one mentions kids, right? Because they're from the liberal end of the spectrum. It's like, well, that's kind of what it was designed for in a way. And if not, to have the kids, to at least pair bond the adults, to not, it's like, I like this person enough that I'm not going to murder this baby. It's like, it's very bonding. So I'm curious about this. I literally just came up with this yesterday. This reproductive either denial from the liberal side or sort of that's all it is from the conservative side. There seems to be something going on there that I don't quite get. Making any sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's how we all came to be through sex, right? So sex is for procreation, but if you think about all the sex that's being had all the time and how many times that, creates a pregnancy and creates a birth, it's like, that's a pretty small percentage. This sort of gets into fertility. If a woman's having a regular enough menstrual cycle, she can only get pregnant 5 days out of the month.
Yeah.
So there's so many other days in the cycle where you can have the sex and not get pregnant. So
there could still be reproductive bonding, right? Do you see what I mean? Like,
yes,
the hell of a
exactly.
good way of keeping a partner around, male or female.
Exactly. So that gets into the question of another debate, like, is sex ever casual? Because like the neurochemistry of sex, when we have sex, it's like there's the oxytocin released, the bonding hormones, and it's like, so even if your intention is to have, quote unquote, casual sex or, a one night stand or these kinds of things, there is still some, like, a deep connection that forms. You are still having a deep embodied neurochemical love experience with someone. And I think to deny that is a little bit short-sighted. And it also doesn't mean you have to pair up with that person. Like, you can be in full choice, but it's good to have informed consent about what's really happening in bodies when they have sex.
I guess there's something in the conservative truth, because often in this polarization in the States, and we'll come back to maybe our own cultures in a minute, there's something in that polarization where the conservatives deny that, you know, the pleasure in sex, the fun of sex, the fact it's not all about having babies, right? This sort of puritanical side. But on the liberal side, there's a denial of something like the power of sex, like you just described, or the sacredness of sex. Mm-hmm. And there's that sort of, you know, it's all sport, it's all casual, it's all fun. And this denial of the sort of life side of it, that it is somehow linked to life. You know, I just saw a newspaper article about someone who's been arrested in Britain for having sex with tractors. Now, yeah, he's having sex with tractors and he's been arrested for it. Now, that's pathological. I don't care how fucking liberal you are. Even in Portland, having sex with a tractor. Do you know what a tractor is? To say that in America, it's like a John Deere, like a machine. Like that's pathological. Because it's so not linked to reproduction. Something's gone a bit weird in that. And that trend towards the completely non-reproductive also seems to be in culture in quite a big way now. Even as someone, I would consider myself on the far end of liberality when it comes to sexuality, right? Like in my attitude's pretty fucking liberal about sex. Less about tax, more about sex. And even I'm now going, maybe I'm just getting old, getting middle-aged, even I'm going, whoa, this is a bit far. You know, even as someone that's fought for gay rights and, you know, been in open relationships, blah, 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 I'm sort of going, something's gone wrong in the modern world around sex, that it's become so divorced from any kind of reproductive route, as well as love connection sometimes, right? Like,
yeah,
love happens.
I think that's the porn influence. That's like taking sex and like constantly upping the ante and making it more and more and more like just kind of like Cirque du Soleil. It's like, well, what else can we do and what else can we do? And
next, have you had a young lover recently? They're so porno recently. I'm like, whoa, like things have changed.
Yeah, porn is the worst sex education. It's great entertainment. Like if you like that's what we need to remember. Like porn is a movie, it's actors, it's entertainment. It's not that different from like, you know, watching Netflix or something. It's make believe. But when we use that for education or educational purposes and to learn what to do, that's when we really go wrong. And that's where, you know, culture has failed us and sex education has failed us because we don't learn anything. And so it's so easy, like porn is so accessible that's where, you know, most young people turn to learn about sex. And it's just, most average people are not, you know, porn actors are not the Olympics of sex. And like our bodies aren't like ready to do those things and usually don't want to. And that's where a lot of trauma comes in, is like doing too much too fast, you know.
What's the definition of trauma, isn't it? Too much too fast too often.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You've seen a Mexican piece. Do you want to bring that in, just on a sort of cultural?
I mean, I was just thinking alongside this effect of pornography, and I don't think people might relate it directly to pornography, but it's definitely a culture that's created alongside that, which is casual's good. And I don't mean morality, but you're not cool if you're mixing emotions, right? And it's, women cannot do that. Like you should be able to have sex without emotions, when it's even in a sense, a biological wiring that's happening when you're connecting to someone. And then, I mean, I think this happened like maybe 20 years back. There was sort of like this idea of, you know, keep it casual and no feelings attached, no strings attached, all of these ideas thrown out so easily. Also dating apps contribute to this idea.
Dating apps have ruined the whole what's so-called sexual marketplace.
The no drama, right? What drama means having emotional needs, like regular respect as humans. But then there's sort of like this veil around this where it's cool to be able to do that. And I've seen a lot of young women try to fit that model because that's what's good, that's what's acceptable, and that's what men want.
It's also a statistical thing. Like if you're using dating apps, it means there's less couples happening. And I just point people to my friend Chris Williams' podcast. He's had several guests on talking about the effects of technology and how it creates a very different, because of the choice factors, it sort of multiplies that most women will be fighting over a very small group of guys. And there's now a large number of young men that don't have sex at all, and a large number of women who are essentially only have the availability of sort of casual sex where they're being used and not really connected with. And it's that's almost a technological shift as much as anything. Anyway, Mexico.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, culturally speaking, is this idea of being able to, first of all, break through the religious, moral, cultural aspect of saying, I like sex, just actually expressing it. I mean, I've even seen people who actually go to workshops and are willing to step into the work, but will not say the word. Like, we know.
It's a Catholic country here, by the way, as well. So, yeah. Like
the word sex, it's like, oh, that course, that thing, or, shine away even from actually voicing it. So it's super radical to take that step, let alone actually take the steps to living that kind of life with their partners. And like I said this as a joke about, a lot of women migrating. If you say that there's lots of men who are open and willing to, whatever you want, I'm open to that. Mostly what you find culture is like, no, like, why do you need something else? And that's weird stuff. And that's don't move what works for me. And that's one of the, I guess, the second barrier that women face big time when doing this type of work.
Cool. Emily, are there any sort of major topics of yours we haven't touched upon? I mean, there's lots there. I know you sent me some good questions and things. So anything you think, I should really include that in the last 10 minutes?
I think we touched on a lot. Maybe getting back to this idea of embodied pleasure, I think could be a good way to kind of bring things back. And, staying in the cultural realm, but just shifting from sex to pleasure, right? We have all these ideas about pleasure, and usually they are that it's guilty, right? We learn, like, when people think of the word pleasure, they immediately think, oh, guilty pleasures. So we think it's guilty. We think it's frivolous. We think it's self-indulgent. It's something we can have when all the work is done. But the way pleasure actually works in the body is it is your resource for stress. It is the counterpoint to stress. So while we're all living in these like hyper stressed lives, like not saving the pleasure for when we're done, but starting to weave pleasure in small ways throughout the day is, another form of like meditation, is like taking pleasure in from your environment and all the ways that it's always available to you, and letting that be the inroad into your body. So when there is so much stress and pain inside, it's like, if you use the inroad of pleasure, it's a safer way in. And then it's like a life raft when you start to feel the pain, when you start to feel the things that don't feel good in your body, letting whatever feels good or neutral be the resource to be able to feel everything that's in your body.
Even the framing we have of embodiment or mindfulness, like, talking about paying attention, like paying, it sounds like we're giving, have to put some money down, and attention even sounds like tension. It sounds awful. It's not like suckling on the teat of pleasure of the body. Like, it's like, there's something in like even how we frame, I'm doing mindfulness now, it's hard work, as opposed to, wow, I'm really enjoying myself. And as you say, that's resourcing.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed is when I'm stressed, I tend to seek pleasure more, and that can be a little bit dangerous, actually. Like the first time I was in Ukraine recently, I was just eating a lot of sugar and stuff. It's easy to kind of seek pleasure as a way out, but it seems like we don't give pleasure enough credit in the embodiment world because of the strong kind of Buddhist influence, which is kind of...
Yeah. When I started doing somatic practices in college, like, it was all about this like deep paying attention, but there was no orientation to like what felt good. It was more like a science experiment. And it was all in the name of becoming a more articulate mover so that you could look cooler when you went back to dance. So it had this real like sort of production driven purpose to it. And so I just, there became a point where I just couldn't do that anymore. And I lost all interest in that. And now it's really about, building the habit of pleasure just because it's your birthright, because you get to feel good. And, a lot of that like religious cultural thing about, oh, you'll feel good in the afterlife, suffer, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's your body. Like you're allowed to feel good. You're allowed to feel pleasure in there. So a lot of what I'm doing now is helping people build that habit and giving themselves permission to like find what feels good, like breathe that through their body, let that be like a beautiful moment in their otherwise like intense, stressful day, because that's what we're working with now.
Cool. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only guy enjoying the gym when I'm in there. I'm like, why is no one else smiling? I really enjoy it. There's a machine where you have to like pull down cables and you're like, whoa. I'm just in like massive, like, I'm loving it the whole time. Everyone else is like doing their reps really miserably.
That would be me.
That would be you doing miserable reps. No, I love it.
You saw me in the gym.
But that's me, right? We all enjoy, but these other things we enjoy. We enjoy different things.
That's why I don't go to the gym.
Because you don't enjoy it?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Schwarzenegger used to enjoy it. He talked about the pump. You have to get the pump. It feels like orgasm in your body. Love it. It's a great, clever Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, like finding like pleasure in the work. Like that's a thing too. Like I go to the gym and like started putting weights on my back and doing squats, and like, yeah, there is like, and now I can like orient to like, well, what feels good about like that like effort, and like that's now fun because I can choose to when I want to do that. And I'm no longer forced into a 9-to-5 where I have to like push past my body's limits all the time. It's like, no, I'm in choice and I can really enjoy that effort as opposed to struggling through the effort because I have to.
Cool. Well, let's mention some resources and then we'll move to your personal ones. In this field of sort of pleasure in the body and overcoming low libido, who do you rate? Who's out there that you think's worth pointing people to? We've had a number of cool guests on. Kayla Boehm's impressed me a number of times on the conferences and things. Anyone you two want to point people to in this kind of areas?
I think the book Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski is
it's a great
foundational.
Title.
It's really foundational. If you have low libido or are confused about what's going on with your sexuality, that will let you know what's up and make you feel normal and okay.
Cool. Any other teachers or books or vibrators, anything?
It's gonna be a little biased, but go to your therapist.
Go to your therapist. Okay, go to your therapist. Like, what's going on here?
To me, that's the fastest way to clear the pathway to pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah, the therapist. I think trauma work. Do the trauma work. Like, it's one of the ways I motivate my clients. I'm like, you will fuck better and have a better sex life if you do the trauma work. That is just a fact. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we said what else to write. Awesome. Emily, where do people find you? Where do they go on the interweb? I think I found you on the Instagram originally. Where do people go to check out your stuff?
Yeah, you can go to erosparkmovement.com, erosparkmovement.com, or emilyathena.com.
And you do one-to-one stuff virtually for people listening. You do online classes so that people don't have to be in Oregon, God forbid, to do the job.
Yeah, no, we do virtual. I do virtual. So yeah, you can be anywhere.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out. This has been a nice triologue. Is that the word? A triologue. Triologue. Like a dialogue. Like a triologue.
Oh, yeah, 3. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to go 3 something like that. No, it's too rude. So triologue I went with. Now I've said it. It's too late. Anyway, pleasure, Emily, which is what it's all been about. So thanks for the conversation. Lovely to get to know you a bit. And yeah, cool. Keep in touch.